quiet breakdown. Have you ever woken up one morning, stared at the ceiling, and thought, "Is this it?" Not in a dramatic way. No tears. No screaming. Just a quiet question that sits on your chest like a cat that refuses to move. This video is about that feeling. About living in the United States, having a family, children, responsibilities, and still feeling lost in your own life. It's about learning English slowly, not to sound smart, but to survive. And maybe, to finally live for yourself. The strange thing about my crisis in my 30s is that it didn't arrive with fireworks. It came like bad weather. Quiet. Predictable. Impossible to stop. 2 weeks ago, here in the US, my life looked fine from the outside. Married. Kids. A home. A routine. The kind of life people online love to summarize with one word: stable. But stability can be dangerous when it slowly turns into silence. Not peaceful silence. The heavy kind. The kind where you stop asking yourself questions because you're afraid of the answers. You don't notice it at first. You still wake up early. You still make breakfast. You still talk to your spouse about bills, schedules, and the kids' school. But somewhere between checking the weather app and answering emails, you disappear. Not physically. Mentally. Emotionally. Psychologists call this emotional numbness. It's when your brain decides that feeling less is safer than feeling everything. Basically, your nervous system is pulling the emergency brake. Quietly. Living in the US makes this easier to hide. The culture rewards productivity, not presence. If you're tired, you drink more coffee. If you're sad, you keep busy. If you're lost, you Google a solution. Climate plays a role too. Depending on where you live, the weather can trap you indoors, cut sunlight, and mess with your mood. Seasonal affective disorder is real, but nobody warns you that emotional winters can happen even when the sky is blue. One night, after the kids were asleep, my partner asked a simple question. Not a deep one. Just, "Are you okay?" And my brain froze. That's usually a bad sign. When your answer takes too long, it's because you don't know which version of the truth is safer. I said, "I'm just tired." Which is adult language for I don't know who I am right now. Here's where English quietly entered the story. Not classroom English. Not grammar drills. Just simple, slow sentences I listened to late at night. Stories. Real voices. Nothing fancy. Neuroscience shows that storytelling helps regulate emotions because it gives the brain structure. When life feels chaotic, stories create order. Listening to English stories wasn't about language improvement at first. It was about calming my mind enough to feel something again. When you're overwhelmed, your brain switches to survival mode. In that mode, learning feels threatening. Speaking English feels risky. Making mistakes feels dangerous. That's why so many adults say, "I tried learning English but I failed." You didn't fail. Your brain just chose safety over growth. And honestly, that's not weakness. That's biology doing its job a little too well. In my 30s, I realized something uncomfortable. I was living responsibly, but not intentionally. I was doing what needed to be done, but not what needed to be felt. Marriage had become logistics. Parenting had become management. And I had become efficient and invisible. Studies in positive psychology show that meaning doesn't come from comfort. It comes from alignment. When your actions match your values. Mine didn't anymore. So I started small. Painfully small. 5 minutes of listening. One simple English sentence repeated out loud. Slowly. Bad pronunciation. No pressure. This is called low-stakes learning, and research shows it lowers cortisol, the stress hormone. When stress drops, motivation can breathe again. That's when I noticed something strange. I wasn't just learning English. I was reconnecting with myself. The crisis wasn't loud. It didn't destroy anything. But it demanded attention. Like a warning light you can't ignore forever. And here's the punchline nobody tells you. You don't overcome a life crisis by making big decisions. You overcome it by making honest ones. Quietly. Daily. Even 5 minutes at a time. Because sometimes, your life isn't falling apart. It's just asking you to finally show up. 2 weeks in America. Imagine measuring your life not in years, but in weather forecasts. That's what the last 2 weeks in America felt like for me. Hot one day, freezing the next. Sunny in the morning, heavy clouds by evening. And somehow, my emotions decided to copy that exact schedule. This part of the story is about those 2 weeks. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just real days that quietly rearranged how I see my life, my family, and myself. 2 weeks ago, I thought my problem was time. Not enough time to rest. Not enough time to learn English. Not enough time to think. But psychology says when you feel constantly rushed, the real issue isn't time. It's cognitive overload. Your brain is juggling too many roles at once. Parent, partner, worker, immigrant, learner. Something always drops. And usually it's you. Life in the US moves fast, but in a very organized way. Calendars rule everything. School drop-offs. Work meetings. Doctor appointments. Even family time gets scheduled. At first, that structure feels comforting. Then one day, you realize your entire week is planned. Except for you. No space to ask, how am I really doing? Just boxes to check. Climate adds another invisible layer. Depending on where you live in America, the air itself can shape your mood. Sudden cold makes your body tense. Long heat drains your energy. Research shows temperature changes affect serotonin levels, which control mood and motivation. So when you feel unmotivated, it's not always a mindset problem. Sometimes, it's your nervous system reacting to the environment like it's under attack. During these 2 weeks, I noticed how often my conversations at home were functional. Did you pick up the kids? What's for dinner? We need to pay this bill. Necessary words. Useful words. But not connecting words. Marriage doesn't break because of big fights. It erodes because of small silences. Studies on long-term relationships show emotional distance grows when couples stop sharing internal experiences, not when they disagree. One evening, while standing in the kitchen, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. Tired eyes. Neutral face. No sadness. No joy. Just muted. That moment hit harder than any argument. Because it wasn't about my partner or my kids. It was about me slowly stepping out of my own life while still physically being there. That's called role engulfment, when your identity gets swallowed by responsibilities. This is where learning English came back into the picture, but differently. I stopped treating it like a goal and started treating it like a pause. 10 minutes. Headphones on. A slow English story playing. Simple words. Clear pronunciation. Linguists say listening to slow, comprehensible input helps the brain relax because it reduces uncertainty. When the brain understands without struggling, it releases dopamine, the motivation chemical. Something unexpected happened. Those 10 minutes became mine. Not parent time. Not partner time. Just human time. I didn't analyze grammar. I didn't chase fluency. I just listened. And sometimes, I repeated a sentence out loud quietly. I am still here. Simple English. Heavy meaning. Over the next days, I felt small shifts. Not happiness. Awareness. I noticed how my kids reacted when I was more present. How my partner's voice softened when I actually listened instead of waiting to respond. Neuroscience calls this co-regulation. When one nervous system calms down, others around it follow. You don't need to fix everyone. You just need to start with yourself. These 2 weeks taught me that purpose doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It creeps in when you slow down enough to notice what hurts. Motivation doesn't come from pressure. It comes from permission. Permission to be imperfect. To learn slowly. To speak English badly. To feel confused without immediately solving it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Many adults don't fail at learning English because they're lazy or incapable. They fail because they associate learning with judgment. School trauma. Fear of sounding stupid. Fear of being seen. When you're already overwhelmed by life, your brain refuses extra risk. That's not resistance. That's self-protection. By the end of those 2 weeks, nothing external had changed. Same house. Same family. Same responsibilities. But internally, something shifted. I stopped asking, "How do I fix my life?" and started asking, "How do I stay with it?" One slow English sentence at a time. Because sometimes, purpose isn't about finding a new direction. It's about finally paying attention to where you already are. Weather changed my mood. Imagine waking up and checking the weather before you check your own feelings. That sounds strange, but in the last 2 weeks, the weather in America seemed to know my emotional state better than I did. One morning it was bright and cold, the kind of cold that makes your body alert but your heart distant. The next day it was warm, heavy, almost sticky, like the air itself was tired. And without realizing it, my mood followed along, obediently, like a shadow that never argues. We don't talk enough about how climate shapes who we become. Especially as adults. Especially when you move, settle, or start over in a country like the United States. In my 30s, I used to think emotions came from thoughts. If I felt low, I blamed my mindset. If I felt unmotivated, I blamed my discipline. But neuroscience tells a more uncomfortable truth. Your body often decides first, and your thoughts just write the explanation later. In many parts of the US, weather changes fast. Sudden cold fronts. Long gray mornings. Short winter days where the sun disappears before you're done working. Research shows that reduced sunlight lowers serotonin production, which directly affects mood, focus, and motivation. So if you feel empty, slow, or disconnected, it might not be because your life is wrong. It might be because your nervous system is under weathered attack. I noticed this one afternoon while driving. The sky was perfectly blue, but the air was sharp. My shoulders were tense. My jaw was tight. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was bracing. That's when it hit me. My body was acting like something bad was about to happen, even though nothing was. This is called chronic low-grade stress, and climate can trigger it without permission. At home, this showed up in small ways. I spoke less. I reacted slower. Conversations felt heavier, even when the topic was light. My partner noticed before I did. She asked why I seemed far away. I wanted to say, "It's just the weather," but that sounded ridiculous. Yet, psychology backs it up. Environmental stressors, temperature, light, air pressure, affect emotional regulation more than we admit. This matters for learning too. Especially learning English. When your body is stressed, your brain prioritizes survival over growth. Language learning requires vulnerability. You make mistakes. You sound wrong. You feel exposed. In a stressed body, that feels unsafe. So motivation drops, not because you don't care, but because your system is protecting you. During these days, I found myself avoiding English practice without realizing it. Not consciously. I just felt resistance. Like my brain was saying, "Not now. Too much." Linguists call this affective filter, when emotional stress blocks language input. The higher the stress, the less your brain absorbs. You can listen, but nothing sticks. One evening, instead of forcing myself to study, I did something different. I sat near the window. I noticed the light outside. I acknowledged the cold. I didn't fight it. Then I played a slow English story. Very simple. Calm voice. No pressure to understand every word. Just sound and rhythm. Studies show that slow, predictable audio can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which signals safety. When the body feels safe, learning becomes possible again. I realized something important. Climate doesn't just change your mood. It changes how hard you are on yourself. On cold, dark days, I judged myself more. I felt behind. Inadequate. Like everyone else was handling life better. This is called negative cognitive bias, and it intensifies under physical stress. Your brain selectively focuses on what's wrong, ignoring what's stable. That bias affected my marriage too. Small misunderstandings felt bigger. Silence felt colder. Not because love was gone, but because my emotional bandwidth was reduced. Research in relationship psychology shows that external stress, like environment, often gets misattributed to the relationship itself. You think the problem is us, when it's actually everything around you pressing in. When I understood this, something softened. Not the weather. Me. I stopped asking, why am I like this? And started asking, what does my body need right now? Sometimes the answer was warmth. Sometimes rest. Sometimes a familiar English sentence spoken slowly, like a grounding exercise. I am allowed to go slowly. Simple words. Powerful effect. Here's the thing most people don't tell you about living in America. The systems are efficient, but the environment can be emotionally demanding. You're expected to function the same in every season. Same productivity. Same energy. Same motivation. But humans aren't built that way. We're seasonal creatures pretending to be machines. By the end of that week, I stopped blaming myself for feeling off. I adjusted instead. Short walks during daylight. Softer expectations. Slower English listening. This aligns with behavioral science. You don't fix motivation by pushing harder. You fix it by reducing friction. And here's the quiet punchline. When you respect your environment, weather, light, rhythm, you stop fighting yourself. Learning English becomes less of a battle and more of a companion. Marriage feels less heavy. Parenting feels less exhausting. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped demanding summer energy from a winter nervous system. Basically, your mood wasn't broken. It was just responding honestly to the climate around you. Culture shock at home. Most people think culture shock happens at airports. New language. New food. New rules. But real culture shock. It shows up at home, wearing pajamas, asking what's for dinner. It sneaks into your marriage, your parenting, and the way you talk to yourself when no one is listening. In the last 2 weeks, I realized something uncomfortable. American culture didn't just change how I lived outside. It quietly rewired how I lived inside my own house. In the US, independence is treated like oxygen. You're expected to breathe it without thinking. Be strong. Be efficient. Handle your own problems. This sounds empowering, until you're married with kids and suddenly everyone is handling everything alone together. Sociologists call this individualized responsibility, when support systems exist, but you're still expected to manage emotional weight privately. At home, this showed up in small, confusing ways. We were both tired, but neither of us wanted to burden the other. So we minimized. It's fine. I'm okay. Don't worry about it. These phrases sound polite. They sound mature. But psychologically, they create distance. Research on emotional intimacy shows that repeated emotional self-silencing reduces connection more than open conflict ever does. American culture values clear communication, yet discourages emotional messiness. You're encouraged to speak up, but only if you're calm, reasonable, and solution-oriented. Feelings without a plan make people uncomfortable. Over time, I noticed I was editing myself at home the same way I edited myself at work. Only saying what was useful, not what was true. This is where marriage starts to feel transactional. Who did what? Who forgot what? Who's more tired? Love turns into a shared project with deadlines. Studies in family psychology show that couples under cultural adaptation stress often confuse efficiency with care. You get things done, but you stop being seen. My kids felt it too. Children are emotional climate detectors. They don't need explanations. They feel shifts. When adults are disconnected, kids either act out or become overly responsible. One evening, my child asked a simple question in English they'd picked up from school. Are you happy? That question hit harder than any adult conversation. Because it wasn't about happiness. It was about presence. Culture shock also affected how I learned English. At first, I thought immersion meant speed. Speak faster. Understand everything. Keep up. That's the American rhythm. But language learning research shows that adults learn better through slow, meaningful input, not pressure. Yet culturally, slowness feels like failure here. If you're not improving fast, you assume you're doing something wrong. This belief leaked into my self-image. I wasn't just learning English slowly. I was behind. And that word carries shame. Shame doesn't motivate. It paralyzes. Neuroscience shows shame activates the same brain regions as physical pain. No wonder my motivation disappeared whenever I compared myself to others. Marriage under culture shock becomes especially tricky. You're adapting to a new society while trying to protect your relationship from changing too much. But culture doesn't ask for permission. It rewrites expectations. In America, love is often framed as a choice you actively make every day. That sounds romantic, but it also adds pressure. If love requires constant effort, then any distance feels like failure. One night, we argued about something small. Too small to matter. But the argument wasn't about the issue. It was about accumulated silence. About two people performing strength instead of sharing vulnerability. Psychologists call this emotional labor imbalance, when both partners are tired, but no one feels safe enough to stop being the strong one. That night, instead of solving it, I did something different. I said slowly, honestly, I don't know how to be okay right now. No solution. No explanation. Just truth. And something shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Research shows that naming emotions reduces their intensity. It's called affect labeling, and it calms the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Interestingly, English helped here too. Using simple English phrases gave me distance from my own emotions, making them easier to say. I feel tired. I feel lost. Simple structure. Clear words. No poetry. Language became a bridge instead of a test. Culture shock taught me this. Adaptation doesn't only happen in public spaces. It happens in kitchens, bedrooms, and quiet conversations after the kids are asleep. If you don't consciously choose how culture enters your home, it will choose for you. And it usually chooses efficiency over intimacy. The scientific truth is uncomfortable but freeing. You're not failing at marriage, parenting, or learning English. You're navigating multiple cultural systems at once. That cognitive load is real. It drains empathy. It shortens patience. It narrows perspective. Once I saw culture as an invisible force instead of a personal flaw, compassion returned. For myself. For my partner. For my kids. I stopped asking, what's wrong with us? And started asking, what pressure are we under? And here's the quiet punchline. Culture shock doesn't break families. Unspoken adaptation does. When you slow down enough to notice how a culture is shaping your habits, your language, and your love, you regain choice. Because home isn't just where you live. It's where culture either ends, or finally learns to be human. Marriage under stress. Imagine trying to hold water in your hands while someone keeps asking you to clap. That's what marriage under stress feels like. You're trying to keep something alive, something fluid and emotional, while life demands efficiency, speed, and results. In my 30s, living in the United States, I learned that marriage doesn't usually crack from one big disaster. It weakens under constant, invisible pressure. Stress in America is polite. It wears a calendar. It speaks in reminders. It shows up as just one more thing to do. Financial planning. Childcare schedules. Health insurance forms. school emails. None of these are dramatic. That's why they're dangerous. Chronic stress doesn't shout. It whispers until your nervous system forgets what calm feels like. Psychology calls this allostatic load, the long-term wear and tear on the body from repeated stress. High allostatic load reduces emotional regulation, empathy, and patience. Translation: you love your partner, but you have less emotional energy to show it. So love turns practical, efficient, quiet. In our marriage, this showed up as teamwork without tenderness. We worked well together. We solved problems. We divided tasks. On paper, we were doing great. But emotionally, something was missing. Studies in relationship science show that couples can be highly functional and deeply disconnected at the same time. Function replaces feeling when stress stays too long. One night, after the kids were asleep, we sat on opposite ends of the couch, scrolling on our phones. No conflict. No conversation. Just parallel exhaustion. That silence felt heavier than any argument. Because arguments mean you still expect to be heard. Silence means you're not sure it matters. American culture reinforces this pattern. You're taught to be strong, to handle things, to not lean too much. Emotional self-sufficiency is praised. But marriage isn't built on two independent islands occasionally sharing logistics. It's built on mutual regulation. When one person struggles, the other feels it. When both are overwhelmed, the connection suffers. Research shows that under financial and time pressure, couples shift from emotion-focused communication to task-focused communication. You talk about what needs to be done, not how you feel. Over time, the relationship starts to feel like a project, not a partnership. I noticed my own behavior changing. I listened less. Not because I didn't care, but because my brain was tired. Cognitive fatigue reduces active listening capacity. When you're mentally overloaded, your brain prioritizes efficiency over depth. You respond to fix, not to connect. Learning English during this period mirrored my marriage experience. I wanted fast results, clear progress, measurable improvement. But language, like love, doesn't grow well under pressure. Studies in second language acquisition show that anxiety impairs working memory, making it harder to process and retain new information. Stress literally blocks learning. One evening during a small disagreement, my partner said something simple, "I miss us." Not "I'm angry." Not "you did something wrong." Just absence. That sentence landed differently. Because it wasn't an accusation. It was grief. Psychologists note that unmet emotional needs often surface as sadness, not anger, when people feel safe enough to be honest. That night, instead of defending myself, I paused. Silence, but intentional. Then I said slowly, "I miss us too." No explicación. No excuse. just alignment. Research shows that emotional validation, acknowledging feelings without fixing them, restores connection faster than problem solving. Something softened. Not everything, but enough to breathe. We didn't solve our stress. We didn't reorganize our lives. But we named what was happening. Naming reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the biggest stressors on relationships. This is where small habits mattered. 10 minutes without phones. A slow English story playing softly in the background while we sat together. Not studying. Just listening. Shared silence, not lonely silence. Neuroscience calls this shared attentional focus, and it strengthens bonds by synchronizing brain activity. Marriage under stress doesn't need grand gestures. It needs safety. Safety to be tired. Safety to be slow. Safety to say, I don't have energy today, but I'm still here. In American culture, showing exhaustion feels like weakness. But biologically, acknowledging limits prevents burnout. Over time, I realized my crisis wasn't about falling out of love. It was about being too exhausted to feel it. Emotional connection requires surplus energy. When life consumes everything, nothing is left to share. Here's the uncomfortable science-backed truth. You don't repair a stressed marriage by trying harder. You repair it by reducing stress. Less pressure. Fewer expectations. Lower emotional taxes. This applies to learning English too. When you stop demanding fluency, you allow progress. In my 30s, I stopped measuring my marriage by how smooth it looked and started measuring it by how safe it felt. Safe to speak slowly. Safe to learn imperfectly. Safe to rest without guilt. And here's the quiet punchline. Marriage doesn't break when love disappears. It strains when stress takes up all the space where love used to breathe. Children feel everything. Children don't need long explanations. They don't need lectures. They don't even need words most of the time. They feel first. Always. If adults are emotional weather, children are the open windows. Whatever changes in the air, they notice it before anyone else admits it exists. I learned this the uncomfortable way. Not through a tantrum. Not through misbehavior. But through quiet observation. In the middle of my own stress, my kids became softer, quieter, more careful. And that scared me more than noise ever could. Psychologists call children emotional barometers. Their nervous systems are still developing, which means they absorb emotional cues without filters. When adults are tense, distracted, or emotionally absent, children don't think, "My parents are stressed." They think, "Something is wrong, and it might be my fault." That's not drama. That's developmental psychology. During those 2 weeks, I noticed small changes. My child asked fewer questions. Another stayed closer than usual. Bedtime took longer. More hugs. more hesitation before letting go. These aren't random behaviors. Research shows that when caregivers are emotionally preoccupied, children increase attachment behaviors to restore a sense of safety. What hurt the most was realizing they were adapting to me, not the other way around. They were lowering their emotional volume to match my absence. That's when guilt creeps in. And guilt is tricky. It feels like caring, but it often leads to withdrawal instead of repair. American culture doesn't prepare parents for this. You're taught to provide, to plan, to manage. Emotional presence becomes optional, something you add when you have energy left. But studies in child development show that attunement, not perfection, is what builds secure attachment. Kids don't need you calm all the time. They need you responsive. Here's where language entered again, quietly. One evening, my child tried to tell me something in English they'd learned at school. Simple words. Slow sentence. They paused, searching for vocabulary. Normally, I would have corrected them or finished the sentence. This time, I waited. That pause mattered. Linguists call this processing space. In learning, silence isn't failure. It's effort. That moment wasn't about English. It was about patience. About letting someone arrive in their own time. And suddenly, I realized I hadn't been giving myself that same permission. No wonder everything felt rushed. Children also mirror stress through behavior changes that adults misread. Less eye contact. More screen time. Emotional flatness. Studies show that chronic parental stress can lead children to suppress emotions to maintain family stability. They become easy kids. And easy kids are often hurting quietly. This realization shifted something in me. Not into panic. Into responsibility. Not blame. Awareness. I didn't need to become a different parent. I needed to become a more present one. Presence isn't about constant attention. It's about emotional availability. About responding when it matters. Learning English slowly became a shared ritual. Not lessons. Just stories. Calm voices. Familiar rhythms. Research shows that shared listening activities increase oxytocin, the bonding hormone. When children feel emotionally connected, their stress levels drop. So do yours. I noticed changes. Small ones. More laughter. More spontaneous talking. More emotional flexibility. Neuroscience calls this co-regulation, when calm nervous systems help regulate others. You don't teach calm. You model it. Here's the part nobody tells you. When you're overwhelmed, your children don't need you to fix yourself. They need you to let them see you try. Trying is reassuring. It tells them emotions can be handled, not hidden. This also connects to learning. Kids watch how you approach difficulty. If you avoid English because it's uncomfortable, they learn avoidance. If you engage slowly, imperfectly, they learn courage. Developmental psychology calls this social modeling. Your behavior teaches more than your instructions ever will. One night, my child said something simple, "You listen more now." That sentence hit harder than praise. Because it wasn't about effort. It was about presence. And presence is something stress steals quietly. I stopped asking myself, "Am I doing enough?" and started asking, "Am I here?" That shift matters. Children don't need endless energy. They need emotional honesty. They can handle tired parents. What confuses them is emotionally unavailable ones. Here's the quiet scientific truth. Children don't need perfect adults. They need regulated ones. Regulation comes from safety, not pressure. From slowing down, not pushing through. And here's the punchline. Your children aren't judging you. They're learning from how you treat yourself when life gets hard. Why motivation dies. Have you ever noticed how motivation doesn't disappear all at once? It leaks out. Quietly. Like air from a tire you didn't know was punctured. One day you still care. The next day, you tell yourself you'll start tomorrow. And then tomorrow becomes a familiar lie you don't even feel bad about anymore. In my 30s, I used to think motivation was about discipline. If I failed to practice English, if I stopped caring about growth, if I felt stuck in marriage and life, I blamed myself. Weak mindset. Not trying hard enough. But psychology tells a different story. Motivation doesn't die because you're lazy. It dies because your system is exhausted. In the last 2 weeks, I started to see the pattern clearly. My days were full, but not fulfilling. Constant input. No recovery. Work. Family. Responsibilities. News. Screens. Expectations. The brain has limits, even if culture pretends it doesn't. Cognitive science calls this decision fatigue. The more choices and pressures you face, the less energy you have for voluntary effort, like learning English or reflecting on your life. Motivation requires surplus energy, not time, energy. And when you're emotionally overloaded, your brain enters conservation mode. It starts cutting non-essential tasks. Learning a language? Optional. Personal growth? Luxury. Asking deep questions about life purpose? Too dangerous. So motivation doesn't disappear. It gets shut down to protect you. This explains why adults often say, "I know English is important, but I just can't start." That's not resistance. That's your nervous system saying, "We are already carrying too much." Research in neuroscience shows chronic stress reduces dopamine sensitivity. Dopamine isn't just pleasure, it's anticipation. Without it, nothing feels worth starting. Marriage and family stress amplify this. When emotional needs go unmet, your internal resources drain faster. You're constantly regulating others, kids, partner, work, without being regulated yourself. Psychologists call this emotional depletion. When depleted, motivation feels fake, forced, pointless. I noticed this in my body before I noticed it in my thoughts. Heavy chest, shallow breathing, a subtle urge to escape, scrolling, zoning out, anything but effort. Motivation doesn't vanish mentally first. It vanishes physiologically. The mistake most people make is trying to restart motivation with pressure, schedules, goals, shame. But studies show external pressure increases cortisol, which further suppresses motivation. It's like yelling at a tired muscle to lift more weight. It doesn't work. It injures. This is where English learning quietly exposed the truth. When I forced myself to study, I avoided it. When I allowed myself to listen slowly, without goals, motivation returned on its own. This aligns with self-determination theory, which says motivation grows when autonomy, competence, and safety are present. Remove any one of those, and motivation collapses. In my case, safety was missing. I associated learning with judgment, my own harsh judgment. Every mistake felt like proof I was behind in life. So my brain did the only logical thing. It shut the door. The same thing happens in life purpose crises. You don't lose purpose because you don't care. You lose it because caring feels too expensive, too risky. Purpose requires engagement. Engagement requires energy. Energy requires rest and safety. One night, I stopped asking myself, "What's my purpose?" and asked a simpler question, "What feels manageable right now?" That shift matters. Behavioral science shows that tiny actions restore agency. Agency restores motivation. Motivation follows action, not the other way around. So I reduced the task. One English sentence. 1 minute of listening. No tracking. No improvement goals. Just contact. That small win sent a signal to my brain. Effort is safe again. Dopamine responded. Not a rush. A flicker. Enough. Here's something rarely said out loud. When motivation dies, it's often protecting you from burnout. It's not the enemy. It's a warning. Ignore it, and you crash. Listen to it, and you recalibrate. Marriage works the same way. When emotional motivation fades, it's not because love is gone. It's because connection has become effortful instead of nourishing. The fix isn't more effort. It's more safety. In the US, productivity culture teaches you to override signals. Push through. Stay strong. But biology always wins. The nervous system doesn't negotiate. If you don't slow down intentionally, it will force you to stop eventually. By understanding why motivation dies, I stopped fighting myself. I stopped demanding energy I didn't have. I started rebuilding from the ground up. Rest first, safety second, growth last. And here's the punchline that reframed everything for me. You didn't lose motivation because you failed. Motivation stepped back because you needed care first. Brain in survival mode. Imagine trying to learn something new while a fire alarm is quietly ringing in the background. Not loud enough to run. Just loud enough to make you uneasy. That's what living in survival mode feels like. Your brain isn't panicking. It's prioritizing. And learning, especially learning English, drops to the bottom of the list. Survival mode isn't dramatic. It's subtle. You still function. You still show up. But your brain is scanning for threats instead of opportunities. In the last 2 weeks, I realized my brain had been doing this for a long time. Not because something terrible was happening, but because too much was happening without rest. Neuroscience explains this clearly. When stress becomes chronic, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, stays slightly activated. Not enough to trigger fear, but enough to keep you cautious. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for learning, planning and language processing, gets less energy. Translation: your brain chooses safety over growth. This is why speaking English can feel terrifying even when you know the words. Language requires working memory, flexibility, and risk-taking. Survival mode hates all three. It prefers predictability, silence, familiar routines. That's why you understand English better than you speak it. Listening feels safer than being seen. I noticed this pattern everywhere. When asked to explain something in English, my mind went blank. Not empty, blocked. That's not lack of ability. That's threat response. Studies show that perceived social evaluation, fear of being judged, activates the same neural pathways as physical danger. Your brain doesn't care if the threat is real. It reacts anyway. Marriage and family stress feed this loop. When you're emotionally stretched, your nervous system stays on guard. Small misunderstandings feel bigger. Conversations feel risky. You choose silence to avoid conflict. Over time, silence becomes a habit. Survival mode loves habits. They're predictable. Here's the uncomfortable part. Survival mode feels responsible. It tells you you're being careful, practical, realistic. But it slowly shrinks your life. You stop trying new things. You stop expressing needs. You stop practicing English because mistakes feel like exposure. The body gives signals before the mind catches up. Shallow breathing, tight shoulders, jaw clenching, fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. These aren't personality traits. They're nervous system states. And you can't think your way out of them. This is why advice like, just be confident, never works. Confidence is a result of safety, not a decision. The brain needs evidence that effort won't lead to harm. Without that, it resists. I tested this one night. Instead of pushing myself to speak, I changed the conditions. Dim light. Comfortable chair. Slow audio. Familiar English phrases. No goal. No performance. Just exposure. This aligns with graded exposure, a psychological technique used to retrain the nervous system. You don't jump into danger. You approach it slowly until the alarm quiets down. Within minutes, my breathing changed. My body softened. The words felt less threatening. Not exciting. Manageable. And manageable is powerful. When something feels manageable, the brain releases a small amount of dopamine. Not pleasure, but permission. Survival mode also distorts time. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels now. That urgency kills patience. Language learning needs patience. So does healing a marriage. When urgency dominates, depth disappears. I started narrating simple actions in English. Out loud. Alone. I am making tea. I am sitting down. This sounds silly. It's not. Research shows that self-directed speech improves emotional regulation and cognitive clarity. You're grounding yourself in the present moment using language. It tells the brain, nothing bad is happening. As survival mode eased, something else happened. Curiosity returned. Not ambition. Curiosity. I wanted to understand a phrase. I wanted to repeat a sentence. Curiosity is the opposite of fear. It only appears when the nervous system feels safe enough to explore. This had ripple effects. Conversations at home felt less tense. I listened better. I reacted slower. Slower reactions mean fewer misunderstandings. Fewer misunderstandings mean less stress. Less stress means the brain stays out of survival mode longer. It's a loop, but a good one. Here's the truth most people miss. Survival mode isn't a flaw. It's protection. It kept you going. It got you here. But it's not meant to be permanent. When you try to build a future while your brain is defending the present, something always breaks. In America, productivity culture encourages survival mode. Hustle. Grind. Push through. But learning a language, building intimacy, and finding purpose all require the opposite. Slowness. Safety. Repetition. Once I respected my brain instead of fighting it, progress stopped feeling like a battle. English became a space to calm down, not prove myself. Marriage felt less like a test and more like a shared shelter. And here's the quiet punchline that changed how I see everything. Your brain isn't stopping you from growing. It's asking you to feel safe first. Safety before fluency. For a long time, I believed fluency came from effort. More hours. More vocabulary. More pressure. If I just pushed harder, English would finally click. But that belief quietly kept me stuck. Because effort without safety doesn't build fluency. It builds resistance. Fluency is not a language skill first. It's a nervous system state. Think about the moments when your English feels better. You're relaxed. You're alone. Or you're talking to someone kind. No clock. No judgment. Your words aren't perfect, but they come. That's not coincidence. That's biology. When the brain senses safety, the vagus nerve activates the parasympathetic system, the rest and connect mode. Blood flow returns to the prefrontal cortex. Working memory improves. Language retrieval speeds up. This is when fluency becomes possible. But when you practice English like a test, your body prepares for danger. Your shoulders tense. Your breath shortens. Your mind scans for mistakes before meaning. You're no longer communicating. You're defending yourself. This is why grammar drills can feel exhausting even when they're simple. Your brain isn't tired of English. It's tired of being evaluated. I noticed something strange. When I stopped studying and started using English as comfort, my retention improved. I listened to slow stories while lying down. I repeated phrases while walking. I let my voice be soft. No correction. No comparison. The brain learns best in states of mild curiosity and emotional safety. Not excitement. Not fear. Mild curiosity. That gentle "oh, that's interesting" feeling. That's the sweet spot. Here's the mistake most learners make. They wait to feel confident after they become fluent. But confidence comes before fluency, not after. Or more precisely, safety comes before fluency. Children don't learn language because they're smart. They learn because they're safe to be wrong. No one laughs when a child mispronounces a word. The nervous system stays open. The brain experiments. Repetition happens naturally. Adults lose this safety. Especially adults carrying stress, responsibility, marriage pressure, financial worry, or emotional fatigue. Your brain doesn't forget how to learn. It just stops trusting the environment. I tested this by changing one rule. English was no longer allowed to judge me. No mental scorekeeping. No, that was bad. No replaying mistakes. If a sentence came out wrong, I let it pass like a car on the street. This isn't laziness. This is exposure therapy. You teach the brain that nothing bad follows imperfection. At first, it felt irresponsible. Like I wasn't serious enough. But seriousness is often fear in disguise. Real learning is playful. Even when the topic is deep. I started speaking in fragments. Not full sentences. Thinking about this. Not sure yet. Feels heavy. Fragments reduce cognitive load. They're easier to retrieve under stress. And here's the secret. Native speakers do this constantly. Perfection is not native. Flexibility is. As safety increased, I noticed pauses disappearing. Not because I spoke faster, but because I panicked less. Panic creates gaps. Calm fills them. This changed how I saw accents too. Accents aren't problems. They're identity markers. When you try to erase them, the nervous system tightens. When you allow them, the voice relaxes. Relaxed voices communicate better, even with imperfect pronunciation. Marriage taught me the same lesson. Conversations went better when the goal wasn't to win or explain perfectly, but to stay connected. Language works the same way. Communication beats correctness. I stopped asking, "Did I say that right?" and started asking, "Was I understood?" Those are different goals. The first creates fear. The second creates clarity. Another shift: I reduced input. Not more. Less. Too much content overwhelms the brain and triggers survival mode again. One short story repeated over days is better than 10 new ones rushed through. Familiarity builds safety. Safety builds fluency. The brain loves patterns it recognizes. Repetition isn't boring to the nervous system. It's reassuring. I chose one phrase each week. Just one. I used it everywhere. In thought. In speech. In writing. By the end of the week, it felt like mine. Ownership creates confidence faster than variety. Something unexpected happened. My listening improved too. When you're not anxious about responding, you hear more. Anxiety narrows perception. Safety widens it. This is why fluency suddenly appears for some people after moving abroad. It's not immersion alone. It's permission. The environment forces communication, but it also normalizes mistakes. Everyone struggles. No one is special. The threat level drops. You don't need to move countries to create that environment. You need to redesign how English lives in your body. Ask yourself this honestly. Does English feel like a test? Or a place to rest? If it feels like a test, your brain will protect you from it. If it feels like rest, your brain will invite it in. The biggest lie in language learning is that discipline beats discomfort. In reality, safety dissolves discomfort, and discipline becomes unnecessary. Fluency is not something you force open. It's something that opens when it feels safe enough to breathe. The 5-minute return. There's a moment in every quiet crisis when motivation disappears completely. Not dramatically. Not with despair. Just gone. You don't feel lazy. You feel empty. And this is where most self-improvement advice fails you. It tells you to push harder when your system is already exhausted. But the brain doesn't restart with motivation. It restarts with permission. I learned this the slow way. On a night when even 5 minutes of English felt heavy, I didn't quit. I changed the definition of success. Instead of learning, my goal became returning. Just coming back. Opening the audio. Sitting with the language. No outcome required. That's the power of 5 minutes. 5 minutes is short enough that the nervous system doesn't panic. It doesn't trigger the inner voice that says, "This will take forever." There's no future threat. Just now. Neuroscience backs this up. The brain evaluates effort before action. If the effort feels large, the amygdala flags danger. If it feels small, the prefrontal cortex stays online. 5 minutes keeps the gate open. But here's the deeper truth. 5 minutes isn't about time. It's about identity. When you return for 5 minutes, you send a message to yourself, "I'm still here." Not productive. Not fluent. Not impressive. Just present. And presence is the foundation of rebuilding anything. Language, confidence, or self-trust. At first, my 5 minutes were messy. Some days I just listened without understanding. Some days I repeated one sentence like a broken record. Some days I stopped at 3 minutes and didn't apologize to myself for it. This matters. Because self-judgment resets the stress cycle. Gentleness breaks it. The brain tracks patterns, not promises. It doesn't care what you plan to do tomorrow. It cares what you did today, even briefly. Each return weakens the association between English and threat. Slowly, something shifted. I stopped negotiating with myself. No more inner debates like, should I study now or later? The decision was made in advance. 5 minutes. No drama. This is what psychologists call behavioral anchoring. You attach an action to an identity, not a mood. I wasn't learning English because I felt inspired. I was doing it because it was part of how I showed up for myself. Think about brushing your teeth. You don't wait to feel motivated. You don't evaluate progress. You return. Every day. That's why it works. Language can be like that too, but only if you remove the emotional weight. The mistake most adult learners make is tying English to self-worth. When progress feels slow, identity takes the hit. I'm bad at this. I'm too old. I should be better by now. 5-minute practice breaks that link. There's no room for ego in 5 minutes. Just action. Over time, the 5 minutes started stretching naturally. Sometimes to 10. Sometimes to 20. Not because I forced it, but because my system felt safe enough to stay longer. This is crucial. Duration should be a side effect, not a goal. When you aim for long sessions, you invite pressure. When you aim for consistency, length grows quietly. Another thing happened. My inner voice changed. It stopped sounding like a coach and started sounding like a companion. Less, you need to work harder. More, let's just sit with this. That voice spilled into other parts of life. Conversations with my partner softened. I listened more. I interrupted less. The same nervous system that learns language handles relationships. This is why English was never just about English. In your 30s, especially in a foreign country, you lose parts of yourself slowly. Not because you want to. Because responsibility demands efficiency. There's no time to wander. No space to be bad at something. 5 minutes gives that space back. It's not about mastering vocabulary. It's about practicing being human again. Curious, imperfect, unfinished. And here's the part nobody tells you. Returning builds dignity. Even when results are invisible. Dignity comes from keeping small promises to yourself. Not big life changes. Not dramatic decisions. Small, repeatable returns. Some days, English will feel alive. Some days flat. That's normal. Meaning doesn't come from constant passion. It comes from continuity. I stopped asking, is this working? And started asking, did I return today? That single question changed everything. Because when you return, you stay in relationship. With the language, with yourself, with the version of you that hasn't given up, even quietly. If you're listening to this and thinking, 5 minutes is too small to matter, that thought isn't logical. It's protective. It's the voice of a tired system afraid of disappointment. Answer it gently. Say, we're not fixing our life today. We're just showing up. That is enough. 5 minutes won't make you fluent overnight. But it will make you present again. And presence is where fluency begins. When language becomes a mirror. At some point, something unexpected happens. English stops feeling like a subject and starts acting like a mirror. Not a flattering mirror. Not a harsh one. Just an honest one. You notice the words you choose. The pauses you avoid. The emotions you soften because you don't yet know how to name them. And slowly you realize, the difficulty isn't always the language. Sometimes, it's the truth hiding behind it. When I began speaking English more regularly, slowly, imperfectly, I noticed patterns. I avoided words like want, need, afraid. I preferred safer ones. Busy. Fine. Okay. Words that close conversations instead of opening them. That wasn't an English problem. That was a life habit. Language reveals what you allow yourself to feel. In your native language, you've spent decades building shortcuts. You know how to dodge questions. You know how to sound polite while staying distant. But in a second language, those shortcuts disappear. You're forced to be simpler. And simplicity is dangerous, in a good way. Because when vocabulary is limited, honesty expands. I'm tired. I don't know. This is hard. These are beginner sentences. But they are also emotionally advanced. I remember the first time I said out loud in English, I feel lost. The sentence was simple. Grammatically boring. But my chest tightened. Because I had avoided saying that, even in my own language. English gave me permission to tell the truth quietly. There's a psychological reason for this. When you use a second language, emotional distance increases slightly. Researchers call this the foreign language effect. It reduces emotional overload and allows people to process difficult topics with less fear. That's why some people can talk about trauma more easily in a second language. Not because it hurts less, but because the nervous system feels less exposed. For me, English became a safe container. I could explore thoughts I didn't yet have the courage to face directly. Doubts about my role as a partner. My fear of disappearing into responsibility. My quiet resentment toward a life that looked good but felt misaligned. I didn't start with big confessions. I started with descriptions. This feels heavy. I feel disconnected. I miss something, but I don't know what. Naming sensations comes before naming solutions. The brain needs language to map experience. Without words, emotions stay trapped in the body. This is why learning English during a life crisis feels different. You're not just memorizing phrases. You're building emotional vocabulary. And emotional vocabulary changes behavior. Once you can name something, you can relate to it. Before that, it just controls you. I noticed that as my English expanded, so did my tolerance for discomfort. Not because I became stronger, but because I became clearer. Confusion is exhausting. Clarity, even painful clarity, is stabilizing. Another shift happened in my listening. I stopped listening for correctness and started listening for meaning. Tone. Hesitation. Subtext. And that skill transferred immediately into my relationships. I heard my partner differently. I noticed what wasn't being said. Language learning sharpened my empathy. When you struggle to express yourself, you become patient with others who do the same. You interrupt less. You wait. You give space. These are not language skills. They're human ones. And then came the mirror moment I didn't expect. I realized I had been using busyness as a language. Productivity as proof of worth. Silence as safety. English disrupted that. It slowed me down. Forced me to sit with awkwardness. With not knowing. In those pauses, questions surfaced. What do I actually want? Who am I when I'm not useful? What part of me have I been postponing? These questions are uncomfortable in any language. But in English they felt lighter. Less loaded with history. Less judgment. That's the strange gift of starting over linguistically. You get a second chance to define yourself with fewer expectations. You're not the responsible one. You're not the strong one. You're just someone trying to say something true, with limited words. And that humility is healing. I stopped chasing advanced vocabulary. I started chasing precision. One honest sentence beats 10 impressive ones. Instead of saying, I'm overwhelmed with responsibilities and experiencing existential dissatisfaction, I learned to say, I'm tired, and I feel disconnected from myself. Same meaning. More alive. As my English became more personal, it became more memorable. The brain remembers what matters emotionally. Neutral sentences fade. Meaningful ones stick. This is why learning English through your own story works. Your brain recognizes relevance. It pays attention. It integrates faster. You're not learning a language. You're learning your language. And once that happens, motivation changes shape. It's no longer about improvement. It's about expression. About having a voice, even a quiet, imperfect one. Here's the truth most courses never mention. Fluency without self-awareness feels empty. You can speak perfectly and still feel unseen. But limited language, used honestly, creates connection. That's why some people with strong accents feel more powerful than native speakers. They speak from alignment, not performance. English didn't fix my life, but it showed me where my life needed honesty. And that changed how I moved through my days. I became less efficient and more present, less impressive and more real. And maybe that's the real purpose of learning a language as an adult. Not to sound native. Not to erase where you came from. But to hear yourself clearly, sometimes for the first time. Are you living for you? Let me ask you something gently, because this is not a question meant to attack you. It's the kind of question that waits patiently, like it already knows the answer. Are you living for yourself? Or are you living to keep everything from falling apart? Most people don't wake up one day and choose the wrong life. They drift into it slowly. One responsibility at a time. One yes after another. One silent sacrifice that feels reasonable in the moment. Until suddenly, your days are full, but you are missing from them. In my 30s, living in the United States, surrounded by routines, policies, schedules, and expectations, I realized how easy it is to confuse stability with purpose. The system here rewards functionality. If your bills are paid, your kids are safe, and your calendar is full, nobody asks if you're fulfilled. Not even you. Especially not you. This is why the question feels uncomfortable. Because to answer it honestly, you have to pause the machine. And machines don't like pauses. For a long time, I thought living for myself meant doing something dramatic. Quitting everything. Starting over. Escaping. But that's a fantasy the exhausted brain loves. In reality, purpose doesn't arrive through explosion. It arrives through alignment. Alignment is quieter, less cinematic, more powerful. It starts when your inner voice and your outer actions stop fighting each other. I noticed that once I allowed myself to ask this question, am I living for me? My relationship with time changed. I stopped treating every free minute as a problem to solve. Silence became information instead of threat. This is important, because modern life trains your nervous system to associate stillness with danger. If you're not doing something, you must be falling behind. But neuroscience shows the opposite. Reflection activates the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for meaning, memory integration, and identity. In other words, you don't find yourself by pushing harder. You find yourself by listening longer. English played a quiet role here again. When I practiced English slowly, speaking, listening, repeating, I wasn't just training language. I was training attention, focus, presence. The very skills life in crisis quietly erodes. And something interesting happened. As my English improved, my tolerance for honesty increased. I became more willing to admit when something didn't fit anymore. A routine, a belief, a role I had outgrown. This is what growth actually looks like in adulthood. Not constant motivation, not endless positivity, but the courage to update your identity. You're allowed to change, even if nothing is wrong. That idea alone can save years of quiet suffering. Many people stay stuck because they wait for permission. A crisis, a breakdown, a disaster big enough to justify change. But meaning doesn't require drama. It requires truth. The question, are you living for yourself? Isn't asking you to abandon your family, your culture, or your responsibilities. It's asking something more precise. Are your choices still connected to who you are now? Not who you were 10 years ago. Not who others need you to be, but who you are becoming. I realized I had been living from an outdated version of myself. Someone who valued survival over expression, safety over voice, being needed over being known. That version of me kept the system running, but it slowly erased joy. When I began choosing myself gently, not selfishly, not recklessly, everything else adjusted. My marriage became more honest. Not easier, but real. My parenting became less controlling and more connected. My learning became meaningful instead of performative. Choosing yourself doesn't mean choosing only yourself. It means including yourself again. Even 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes of slow English. 5 minutes of honest thought. 5 minutes of asking, what do I need right now? These small acts rebuild trust with yourself. And self-trust is the foundation of purpose. Without it, every achievement feels hollow. With it, even ordinary days feel grounded. Here's the part nobody tells you. Purpose isn't something you discover once. It's something you practice. Daily. Quietly. Imperfectly. And sometimes, purpose looks like this. Sitting in a room after a long day. Repeating a simple English sentence. Not to impress anyone, but to hear yourself speak. Clearly, calmly, honestly. That's not small. That's brave. So I'll leave you with this. Not as advice, not as pressure, but as an invitation. The next time you feel tired for no clear reason. The next time motivation disappears without explanation. The next time you wonder why life feels fine but empty. Ask yourself, without judgment, am I living for myself, or just maintaining a version of life that no longer fits? You don't need the answer today. You just need the courage to ask. Because the moment you do, something subtle shifts. And sometimes, that shift is enough to change everything. If you're still here, it's probably not because my English was perfect. It's because somewhere in this story, you saw yourself. Maybe you're living in the US right now, or dreaming of a different life. Maybe you have a family, children, responsibilities. Yet you're not sure who you're living for anymore. And maybe, like me just 2 weeks ago, you're learning English not to impress anyone, but simply to survive, to breathe, to feel real again. This video doesn't really end here. Because learning English slowly through real life stories is only the beginning. In the next videos on this channel, I'll keep sharing real stories about life in America, climate, culture, policies, family. Slow, simple English you can actually understand and use. And moments where learning English stops feeling like pressure, and becomes a place to heal and reconnect with yourself. If you want to practice listening, reading, and speaking English naturally. If you're tired of boring lessons and want real stories instead. And if you're looking for a space where you can learn English while understanding your own life better. Subscribe to this channel now. Turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss the next video. Because the next story might say what you've never been able to say out loud. Before you go, leave a comment below. Are you living for yourself, or just surviving? I read every comment. And who knows, your answer might become the next story on this channel.